7 glowing wands arranged like a stockade around a man submerged in shadow while the person he loves walks away. It's an image that captures the specific, crushing weight of a first major heartbreak. We're looking at the 7 of Wands from Joe Bandel's Oak Tarot of Love and Romance, a card that pivots sharply away from traditional themes of competition and defense to explore the raw psychological landscape of a spiritual breakup. In this deck, the suit of wands represents spiritual love, which makes this specific card an autopsy of a soul-level connection that has finally fractured. Bandel describes it as the painful loss of innocence, that precise moment when you realize the dream you've been living in isn't just broken, it's over.
It's a stark departure from the Rider-Waite-Smith tradition, where the 7 of Wands is usually about holding the high ground against rivals. There, the conflict is external, but here, the conflict is entirely internal and relational. The man in the card is sitting in total darkness, and those 7 wands aren't weapons he's using to fight off an army, they've become barriers. They represent the defensive walls we build around our hearts when the we suddenly becomes an I. It's the visual representation of what psychologists call identity withdrawal, where the routines and shared meanings of a relationship vanish, leaving a vacuum that feels like a physical ache.
The color palette Bandel uses really drives that home. You have these deep, bruised crimsons and heavy blues, but then there are these faint, almost ghostly golds. It feels like the visual equivalent of that hollow feeling in your chest after the door shuts. But I find the contrast between the two figures fascinating. The man is paralyzed by sorrow, but the woman walking away has a face described as conflicted. She isn't the villain here. She's moving toward freedom, yet it still hurts. It challenges that neat narrative we often tell ourselves about breakups, that there's a heartbreaker and a heartbroken. Here, both are navigating a loss of innocence.
That's a crucial distinction. In the Oak Matrix philosophy, the system Bandel built this deck around, love is viewed as a circuit of awareness. In the earlier cards of the wand suit, like the 3 or 4, that circuit is firing at a high frequency. It's electric, idealistic, and often intoxicating. But by the time we hit the 7, the circuit has flipped. One person, often represented by the male experience in this card, is trying to hold on to the spiritual catalyst of the relationship, while the other realizes that the current has changed. For the woman in this image, moving on isn't a lack of love, but a realization that the relationship can't continue in its current form if she's to remain a sovereign individual.
Sounds like a spiritual crisis as much as an emotional one. If the wands represent our spiritual fire, then having 7 of them stuck in the ground around you suggests that your energy is literally earthed. You're grounded, but in the most painful way possible. You're no longer walking on air. The man's experience is defined by this confusion. How can something that felt so divine and meant to be suddenly leave you alone in the dark? It's a loss of faith in the narrative of soulmates.
And that loss of faith is exactly what Bandel means by the loss of innocence. When you're in those early, high-intensity stages of spiritual love, you're often in love with a projection, an ideal form you've shaped out of the other person. The 7 of Wands is the moment the projection fails. It's the first real breakup because it's the first time you're forced to see the other person as a separate human being with their own needs and trajectory, rather than just a mirror for your own soul. The pain comes from the death of the fantasy, but the card suggests this is the only way to actually find yourself.
Yet even in that darkness, there's the oak tree standing in the moonlight. In mythology, the oak is the king of trees, a symbol of endurance, ancient wisdom, and the ability to weather lightning strikes. It's the most consistent symbol across Bandel's deck. Why put it there, in the background of a scene that feels so final? It seems almost cruel to show a symbol of strength to someone who feels completely depleted.
It's actually the anchor of the whole card. The oak represents the grounded reality that exists beneath the sparks of the wands. While the spiritual fire of the relationship is burning out or being walled off, the oak is a reminder that your core self is still standing. It's a biological and spiritual fact of endurance. In Norse and Celtic traditions, the oak was sacred because it provided shelter and outlived generations. Here, it suggests that while the innocence is dying, a deeper, more rugged form of wisdom is being born. You are losing the puppy love version of yourself to become the oak version of yourself.
So the inner searching mentioned in the card's meaning isn't just about wallowing in the sorrow, It's about recharting that internal map. When a bond that defined you vanishes, you're left with what Pauline Boss calls ambiguous loss. The person is still there in the world, but the connection is gone. That man sitting in the dark is forced to ask, who am I when I'm not half of this couple? The seven wands might be barriers to the outside world, but they also create a private space for that self-interrogation.
Exactly. The barrier is also a boundary. In the Five of Wands of this same deck, we see the energy starting to curdle because people are clinging too tightly. The Seven is the aftermath where that clinging has failed. For the person walking away, the female experience Bandel describes, it's about the need to explore life freely. It's a call for radical honesty. If she stayed just to avoid causing him pain, she'd be living a lie, which would eventually poison both of them. The conflict on her face shows the cost of that honesty, but the act of leaving is her way of honoring her own spiritual growth.
I'm struck by the idea that endings can be the beginning of becoming more yourself. It feels like a very hard truth to swallow when you're the one sitting in the shadows. We're taught that successful love is the kind that lasts forever, so any breakup feels like a failure. But this card reframes it as a necessary evolution. If the goal of the soulmate cycle in this deck is to integrate the masculine and feminine within ourselves, then sometimes a partner has to leave so you can stop looking for completion in them and start finding it in your own roots.
That's the becoming part. Research into the psychology of breakups shows that while they trigger the same brain regions as physical pain, they also lead to post-traumatic growth. People often report a clearer sense of their own values and boundaries once the neurochemical high of a relationship dissipates. You move from a state of fusion to differentiation. The man in the card is in the despair and identity withdrawal phase, but the moonlit oak is the integration phase waiting for him. He has to sit in that darkness long enough to realize he isn't the relationship. He's the person who experienced it.
It's a very stoic interpretation of the Seven of Wands. Instead of defend your position, it's discover your position. Traditional tarot might tell you to fight for the relationship, but Bandel's version seems to say that if you have to build a stockade of wands to keep the connection alive, it's already dead. The real fight isn't to get her back. It's to hold your ground within your own soul while it's being rearranged. It's the mastery of your own fear of being alone.
And that mastery is the only way to reach the hopeful golds mentioned in the card's colors. Those golds are faint because they aren't the blinding, easy sparks of new attraction. They're the hard-won light of self-awareness. It's the difference between a firework and a hearth. The firework is exciting, but the hearth is what actually keeps you warm through the winter. This card is the winter. It's the seasonal shift of the soul where the leaves fall so the tree can survive.
It also speaks to the responsibility Bandel places on the individual. In his writings, he mentions that you can't blame the stars or a bad card pull for the failure of a relationship. The Oak Tarot acts as a mirror. If you pull the Seven of Wands, it's asking you a brutal question. Are you willing to let the sparks fade in exchange for the enduring shelter of the tree? It's an invitation to stop mourning the innocence you lost and start valuing the strength you're gaining.
That transition from being a dreamer to being grounded is the most perilous part of any romance. The Seven of Wands captures that moment of impact. It's not a feel-good card, but it is a get-real card. It honors the grief. It doesn't tell the man to just get over it, but it places that grief in the context of a much larger, much older cycle of growth. Just like the oak tree, which needs both the sun and the deep, dark earth to grow, we need both the joy of connection and the silence of the breakup to become whole.
It's a reminder that even when we feel most isolated, we're part of a natural process. The man in the darkness and the woman walking away are both performing their roles in this spiritual alchemy. The wands that seem like barriers today might eventually become the structure of a new, more resilient life. It's about trusting that the grove is patient, as Bandel puts it. You don't have to rush to closure. You just have to stay present in the shadow of the oak until the dawn comes.
The final takeaway of the Seven of Wands isn't that love is over, but that version of love is over. And while that loss of innocence is permanent, you can never go back to being that naive dreamer. The person you're becoming is someone who can love with their eyes open. That's the real spiritual love the wands are trying to point us toward, a connection that doesn't require you to lose yourself to be with another, but rather a connection between two people who are both as deeply rooted as that oak.
The sorrow of the Seven of Wands is the price of admission for a more authentic life. It's a heavy card, but one that offers a profound kind of dignity to the experience of heartbreak. If you're currently standing in that moonlit grove, wondering where the sparks went, remember that the tree is still there, and so are you. Share this episode with someone navigating the quiet aftermath of a difficult ending.